In October of 2010, online officers with the child exploitation section of the Toronto Police Service have contacted a man on the internet who is sharing very graphic images of young children who are being sexualized. Investigations led officers to trace the internet connection to a Toronto man.
Richard Hawkins was a devout young Christian who decided to dedicate his life to the service of the most needy. After completing his education, he chose to journey abroad to share his expertise and assistance to help all the children who needed it, especially those who did not have a home or parents to take care of them, working as a teacher and volunteer for various charitable works, or at least this is what everyone thought of him, and the image that he himself had built based on lies and deceptions that ended up falling the day a series were discovered of aberrations to the little ones committed by Richard himself. Take a seat because this is one of the videos that will give you goosebumps and probably leave you traumatized. Richard William Huckle was born on 14th of May in the year of 1986 in the county of Kent, Ashford, Great Britain. He attended Harvey Grammar School in Falconstone, where he had a bit of difficulty relating to other children, as due to his skinny appearance, his thin look, he was the target of ridicule from other classmates. Some of them nicknamed him the Rat. For this reason, he preferred to be alone and spend his free time in front of the computer. However, there was nothing else that alerted that there was something wrong with him. You could say he was a completely normal child with an ordinary life. In fact, from testimonies of his old friends, it is known that his parents were very good people and that they were always attentive to him and his needs. Belonging to a devoutly Christian family, he continued with the tradition and frequently attended Ashford Baptist Church. At 16 years old, he left the school he was at to study at South Kent College. After this, he decided to attend an expedition to a school in Namibia, Africa. When he returned and finished his studies, he decided to take a gap year to travel, and at 19, he began his journey, where his first destination was the country of Malaysia. Upon arriving in the Kuala Lumpur community, Richard arrived with a supposed interest in collaborating in charity works as a volunteer in churches, schools, and orphanages to help the most needy children, where he presented himself to people as a Christian philanthropist, teacher, and also a professional photographer. For many years, Joko traveled frequently to Malaysia, Cambodia, and India. He had obtained a certificate in teaching English to speakers of other languages, certificate that qualified him to teach English. In addition to this, he took a course in information technology at the University of Kuala Lumpur and made a living working as a freelance photographer. He quickly earned people's trust, but above all, unfortunately, that of the little ones. He quickly empathized with them, won the children's affection by taking them on excursions to the church, outings where he played with them and photographed them, taking everyone to their homes or institutions where they lived after parties and birthdays, and also helped them with their schoolwork. There are a lot of photographs of him interacting with many different young boys and girls. Something all these had in common was their social condition. They were minors in need of resources and some more of affection and attention. It was from there that this individual took advantage to get what he wanted. He knew how to manipulate each one of them, at least those who were older and therefore more likely to accuse him of what he was doing to them, winning the affection of the children and the trust of all the adults around him, thus having, let's say, a wide freedom to commit all these aberrations. The year 2004 began, and both the Australian and European police were conducting an important investigation about a forum on the deep web called Love Zone, where users shared images and other audiovisual content whose main objective was, well, a taste for the little ones. The police managed to find the web page administrator thanks to the word HIYAS, HIYAS, which he used in each of his posts, and a freckle he had on one of his fingers. It was Shannon McCode. They managed to locate him through Facebook after an extensive search. The police managed to find his home address, and when they caught him, the subject was just online managing this website that you're in Love Zone or the Love Zone. After the arrest and sentencing of this individual to 35 years, the police took control of the website without the other users noticing this hack. The authorities took care of discreetly and gradually eliminating the content and accounts of some users who they later arrested. Until one day they came across a user who caught their attention due to the content he was uploading and the number of minors he was exposing on the site. This user was none other than Richard Huckle. After discovering his identity, they realized that he planned to return to the United Kingdom to spend Christmas with his family and immediately alerted the National Crime Agency. On December 19, 2014, Richard was arrested by agents of the National Crime Agency of Great Britain when he was at Gatwick Airport in London and was interrogated for being suspected of a series of abuses. Some little ones. Huckle's arrest was thanks to Task Force Argos, which is a highly specialized branch of the Queensland Police Service in Australia, responsible for investigating online child exploitation and abuse. When authorities began to question him, he refused to speak and was released on the condition of staying at his parents' house while his belongings, such as his computer, his cell phone, his hard drives, were retained for later review, which at this point was surely, or it was evident that they did not know about the monster that was detained. The police had trusted the boy because he had no previous record of abuses against minors, and that is why he had been released as long as he was in a locatable place, in this case at his parents' house, who at this moment obviously had no idea of the monster they had in front of them. But let's take it one step at a time. The day after his arrest, his parents asked Richard about the charges he was accused of, and it was then when the young man confessed to having been intimate with some minors. His parents, as you can imagine, couldn't believe that their son could have committed such acts. So they quickly called the police and asked them to come for their son as he was not innocent. And later they were part of the statements that played against Hawkeye. Richard Hawkeye was charged with 91 counts. These were broken down into creation and possession of, well, not for being childish, abuse of a 12-year-old, digital penetration. Childish, and the creation of a manual for these people who like little ones called, surely I'm going to censor this, but it's going to appear here on the screen. Pedagogy and Poverty, a guide for the child lover. This was a document created by Richard in which he talked about how to take advantage of poor little ones because he said it was easier than taking advantage of others with a higher social status and the pride he felt for being a pioneer in these types of cases. And on top of everything, he encouraged people, which was the most abhorrent thing still, he encouraged them to follow his steps. In the investigations, more than 20,000 photographs and videos of the assaults that Richard committed were found against babies and children. And thanks to these digital files, 29 victims were identified. In January of the year 2016 was the first hearing in the Central Criminal Court of England and Wales, commonly known as Old Bailey, in which Richard pleaded not guilty to the 91 charges he was being accused of.
There were so many. Imagine the charges that the decision was made to divide all the information into 3 separate trials, as they did not believe it appropriate to subject a single jury
to all the graphic evidence that had to be presented. In the second hearing, which was in the month of April of the same year, Hawkins pleaded guilty to 71 of the 91 charges. After requesting to see all the evidence against him and due to the acceptance of the 71 crimes, the court decided not to initiate a judicial process against him for the remaining 20 charges. The prosecutors, led by Brian O'Neill, showed a long and compelling evidence against Richard that began in the year 2006 during Joko's sabbatical year and continued over between 8 and 9 years until 2014, the year of his arrest. It is known that Richard committed his first crimes when he traveled to Cambodia. His first victims were 2 sisters, aged 4 and 6. The next year, he would return and commit more abuses, which over time grew exponentially in part thanks to Jocko volunteering. In this way, each passing day he became a dangerous predator who also sailed under the flag of being a good man and being concerned about all those children that he himself assaulted in the shadows. On the website where this sick person uploaded photos and videos of his criminal acts, he proudly posted a large number of posts where he boasted about his actions. One of his posts talked about the way he did this to a 3-year-old girl, saying textually, "I hit the jackpot and found the girl as loyal as a dog and nobody seems to care. He even had plans to marry one of these victims and in this way be able to settle in the place, making his future home a place of refuge where he could carry out his terrible full-time abuses and without anyone being able to interfere with his plans." In addition to all the digital files that Richard uploaded to the website, he had much more encrypted material on his computer. By refusing to give the passwords to obtain that information, the authorities still do not have access to that material. Another piece of evidence used against him was the accounting book made by Huckle himself, where he kept it as a kind of waterlog in which he wrote the number of victims and the level of damage he had subjected them to by.
So the
Authorities have a number of more than 200 victims, although in the photos and videos they have only identified from 2003. Hawkeye was prosecuted under Section 72 of the crime law, Sexual Offences of 2003. A law that allows British citizens to be tried and convicted in the United Kingdom for child sexual offenses committed abroad. This is to prevent child sex tourism. This strategy is known as extraterritorial jurisdiction and is a measure valued by organizations dedicated to the benefit and protection of the youngest. Finally, the sentencing hearing was reached, which lasted 3 days from June 1st, 2016 to June 3rd of that same year. The judge in charge of the sentence, Peter Rook, stated that the only thing the defendant should expect is to go to prison for a long time due to the number of life sentences that had been assigned to him, due to the severity of the acts he committed. Not even the fact that Richard, as a last resort, pretended to suffer from a mental illness that forced him to commit all those atrocities saved him from jail and from receiving a fair sentence. When mentioning the sentence, the judge declared it, "From my point of view, he may well harbor feelings of regret, but there is no genuine feeling of remorse in this case. You were and are obsessed with the smallest ones. You have been abusing them for years." In one of his posts, he claimed that he had been consumed by his illness. It's also clear that had he not been caught, he planned to continue with the same lifestyle using the experience. He was willing to boast and share with others abuses to continue his exploitation of the children of those communities. Even after admitting to most of the charges and evidence against him, Richard wanted to somehow escape the responsibility of his actions, and at the final hearing, his lawyer Philip read a statement from the defendant in which he blamed all his actions on his lack of maturity. Richard's lawyer asked the judge to take into account his client's young age, his alleged remorse, and the fact that he had no criminal record, also alleging in a psychiatric report that Huckle had little intimate experience with women, and that while I don't know what that has to do with it, and he suffered from depression as a teenager. That just like none of these excuses in parentheses made any sense. The judge obviously did not take into account any of these statements, stating that he was sure that the defendant had carried out all these actions and abuses driven solely and exclusively for his own satisfaction. And finally, on June 6, 2016, Peter Rook sentenced Richard Huckle to 22 life sentences with a minimum penalty of 25 years in prison before being eligible for parole. On the other hand, the human rights group Lawyers for Freedom expressed their dissatisfaction with the fact that the British police did not inform the Malaysian government of the events beforehand, stating the following. The large number of Joko's victims and the extent of his actions in Malaysia raised serious doubts about whether our authorities were really unaware of these abuses. Were there no warning signs or complaints from the victims and their families, the church or NGOs or hospitals? After the fact, the National Crime Agency received harsh criticism from the Malaysian government and other child protection charities for the way in which the case had been handled. Agency officials traveled to Malaysia and conducted child protection workshops in the community where Hawkeye had been living, but the full reality and severity of his crimes were not revealed, which upset the African country's government. On June 4th, 2016, the Attorney General of Malaysia stated that the government would like to know the full reality of Joko's crimes so that they could help the victims and avoid falling into a similar case again. On the other hand, in reality, Malaysia would never have realized the monster hiding behind this kind and concerned individual if he had not been arrested by British authorities. Even so, the National Crime Agency did not want to reveal more details to the Malaysian government, saying that they had already given them enough details and that this information would be sufficient to provide the help the victims needed. The African government decided to set up a hotline to get direct information from people who knew something about the abuses Richard had committed or people who had been violated by him. Special care was also taken with the media as the British government did not want anything about Hawkins' case to come to light until all the content he had uploaded to the deep web of his victims was completely eliminated, and in this way protect the identity of the minors. After the fact, the government of Malaysia was harshly criticized by charitable organizations that judged the lack of laws against abuse and adult content for minors. That is also not said like that. But, well, somehow I have to tell you so that they don't censor me going back, since he mentioned that in section 292 of the Penal Code, only the sale and distribution of obscene material is punished. It is because of this situation that in August of the year 2016, the Prime Minister of Malaysia announced to investigate how the country's protection laws could change to take into account the new ways that some people use to take advantage and thus, well, abuse the little ones and be able to have them ready by the end of the year. But going back to this subject, after the sentence was handed down, the Malaysian government spoke out against it, saying that they had been very weak and that this sick person deserved a much more severe punishment. In their words, not even 1,000 years would be enough. They stated that it seemed unreal to them that in a few more years, Joko could be eligible for parole and thus managed to go out and harm more minors. But this was not going to happen because on October 13th of the year 2019, just 3 years into his sentence, Richard Huckle was found lifeless in his high-security cell. He was 33 years old. It had been Paul Fitzgerald, a prisoner who was incarcerated for attacking and abusing a dog walker, who took advantage and made Huckle suffer to death for an hour and a half. Fitzgerald, let me tell you, abused Richard with a spoon. He cut him, breathed with an electric cable, and shoved a pen up his nose into his brain. In addition to this, he hit him in the face and body and pointed at his neck with an improvised weapon made from a sharpened toothbrush. According to Paul's statements, he had planned this action since early October of 2019 and declared himself guilty of the facts without any remorse, and said he did not feel absolutely guilty because he had done this so that he could feel in his own flesh what his victims felt when they were attacked by him, and boy, did he feel it. He also said that one of his plans was to cook some part of him and eat it and then go and take the life of other inmates. But in the end, he was having so much fun with what he was doing that it was no longer necessary. During Fitzgerald's trial, he was seen happy, smiling, and did not seem at all to be having a hard time. In the end, all he mentioned was that his actions were a form of poetic justice. That's how the end of Richard Hawkins' perversions came to an end after years of abusing innocent beings who naively believed that this man was a good man who only wanted their well-being and who trusted him only for him to use them to satisfy his most twisted fantasies. If you enjoyed this video, see you in the next one, either tomorrow or when another is released.